So I would like to briefly, if I can, point out something that should be kind of obvious, maybe not, but something that's quite apparent and obvious to me, but maybe I guess it's not to most people. But that is that just about every problem we have was created by politicians, created by the government. To keep this simple, I will leave aside social problems. But if I had time to go into it, I could show why most social problems were also created by the government, many intentionally and many inadvertently. But for simplicity, I'll keep this conversation to economic problems, since that's the main thing we usually face anyway. Well, I'll include another non economic problem, but still. Um, so let me give you some examples. Take inflation. I'll post in the link below my other discussions on inflation, but they will explain how inflation is solely caused by the government. No other entity can print money but the government central bank, and an increase in money relative to the increase in goods and services in the economy in terms of quantity is the only reason that we have inflation. Prices rise only because the government prints money and adds money to the economy. Otherwise, prices would fall every single year. Everything would get cheaper. You wouldn't have to save for retirement. Things would cost a fraction as much when you retire. We have the problem of inflation and trying to survive after retirement only because the government prints money and there's no reason for it whatsoever. Another example, unemployment. We have unemployment defined here as um, people who want to work but cannot find a job. We have unemployment only because the government raises the price of labor through minimum wage and union legislation. The government reaches into the marketplace and prohibits transactions from taking place willingly between two parties, the employer and the prospective employee, by the government. It says you cannot work for a certain wage. The employer must pay at least a certain amount. Well, doing that artificially raises the cost of labor and makes hiring many people, mainly at the low end part of the scale, those who are less educated and less knowledgeable, it puts them out of work. It also puts union employees out of work. Unions jack up the price and they agree to work for one price. Then they say, no, we want more. And so, in order to afford more, because companies have only so much money, they lay off some workers to pay the remaining workers more. There's a whole video on this, and that will be in the link below as well. Another example is financial crises. I'll include the Great Depression in this. All recessions, all depressions, all financial crises are man-made. They are a function of the banking system or the banking system as it relates to the economy. The government prints a lot of money, pumps up prices, pumps up spending, lowers interest rates artificially. That causes a boom, but it distorts market prices, it distorts profitability. And then when all of that money printing starts causing inflation, the government raises interest rates, slows the rate of money printing or stops it altogether. That reverses that boom, turns it into a bust, raises the cost of borrowing, reduces demand for products and services. And so what looked like profitable ventures and a growing economy becomes the opposite. Some of it was real, some of it was distorted by artificially low prices and the money flowing, pumping everything up, widening profit margins, which is one thing inflation does. And that's the cause of recessions, financial crises, and the Great Depression. The Great Depression was so great, and not just a normal depression or a normal recession, because the government did more than it traditionally had not done anything during these busts, and recessions or depressions healed themselves within about a year or so. But during the Great Depression, the government kept doing more and more to help, which only harmed. It artificially raised prices. Prices were falling because the money supply was collapsing. Prices needed to fall, wages needed to fall so that more people could be employed with a smaller amount of money. But the government instead said, no, you have to pay higher wages. We have to raise prices. So that caused shortages of both goods and services and labor. And that, along with government works projects and so forth, banks going bust because of the money printing and the subsequent collapse, we had a bust. So the government kept us in a depression for 10 years until World War II came along. And it's not, I won't go into it now, but in short, it wasn't the war that got us out of the depression or the production for the war. It was actually a releasing of price control. It was an implementation of price controls that made it such that the price of labor relative to other things was artificially low. And so there was full employment. Instead of artificially high, it was artificially low. That gained full employment, and that's the short of it. But an economic phenomenon. It's all a matter of the government manipulating wages and prices. That's what it is. And manipulating the money supply and the banking system. So next on the list, another example of problems that we have because the government creates it, healthcare. Healthcare prices are unbelievable in this country. And the reason is because the government artificially reduces the supply of doctors and medical schools. It's been declining through the years. It declines, I believe, not only relative to the population, but it actually in absolute terms, the raw number of medical schools. And I don't think doctors, but medical schools has declined. But the point is, they're restricted. The supply is restricted. It's artificially restricted. And then the government's regulation is responsible for the rest of it. Regulation in terms of the third party payer system, where insurance companies, our employer, insurance companies through employer funding pay, or government funding in the case of Medicare, Medicaid, pays for our insurance, pays for our health care. You don't pay for most of your health care. You pay a deductible and you pay a co-payment, but you're not paying for the majority of it. The businesses are, the government is. You're not deciding whether you'll take the service or not based on how much they're charging, as you do in every other industry. You're just having someone pay, and because they're willing to keep paying and paying and paying, the price goes up astronomically. So the real cost is unbelievably high. So the government keeps spending. The government used to be half of all healthcare expenditures. I think now it's close to 2/3. And most of the rest is insurance, health insurance, paying for your healthcare, funded by companies. And so, what other industry do you know where you don't pay for your own costs? Insurance is supposed to be for anomalous, unexpected, catastrophic events, like your house burns down. It's not supposed to pay for your mortgage. It's supposed to pay for car auto accidents and your car is severely damaged. It's not supposed to pay for checkups and for routine maintenance. but that's what happens in the healthcare market. So, in short, we have all of this wild additional spending on healthcare by third parties that we have nothing to do with, while simultaneously the government restricts the supply of healthcare. So, with an increased demand, a reduced supply, healthcare prices keep going higher, higher, and higher. The same is comparable for our next topic, education. Why are your property taxes so high? Because the vast majority of it goes to public schools. Why are they so expensive? Why do they take up the majority of local government budgets? Because you're not paying those costs, the government is paying for it. You pay the government taxes, but the government decides on the spending. So the government keeps spending more and more and more. The more it spends, the more costs for education rise. And so it keeps paying that additional new higher cost by charging you more for property taxes. And so, and by the way, there's a side effect of that. So the local government spend most of the money on schools. That's why roads don't get paved. That and the fact that the rest of the money that's not spent on schools, most of it's spent on some local wealth redistribution, housing, food, you name it. Um, so the things you think that money is primarily going for, infrastructure and paving the roads and having bridges and parks, no, that's the least of it. So that's why the education, K through 12 education costs keep rising. Similarly, the reason college education costs are so expensive are because A, the government funds much of that cost, especially for state schools. It even funds private schools. You've recently heard about the debate between Trump and Harvard. The government funds most private schools to some decent degree. But beyond that, because the government was funding so much education in the name of helping, well, prices went so high. In the 80s, I think it was, primarily, they switched to funding education through student loans, through government-backed student loans. So now we all get free or seemingly free school loans, government-backed, artificially low interest rates, and we take it on because you've got to have an education, right? You don't, but we say you do. And so we take on the debt and we spend the rest of our lives paying it back. But the bottom line is it's the same as education. There's a limited supply of education, but primarily the problem is a massive increase in demand through government spending and school loans. Again, do you pay for your education? Not for most of it, not for most people, only if you're wealthy, really, these days. So, healthcare and education would be reasonable and affordable, as are the price of groceries on the grocery store shelves, if we were paying for it out of our pocket as we do groceries at the grocery store. A common argument is, well, how could we afford healthcare if we had to pay for it ourselves? That's the tail wagging the dog. Healthcare is expensive. It's hard to afford because we're not paying for it. If we were paying for it, it would be priced where we could afford it, like everything else. Something is priced only for what the market will bear. If the market can't bear it, if people can't afford to pay it, the price won't go any higher. See my video on inflation. So not only that, but another example are wars. We have wars only because governments start wars. Who else starts wars? And okay, we can always say, well, it's those other evil governments. It's all the European governments historically. It was Germany in World War I, World War II. Well, that's not exactly right. It's largely right, but the U.S. played a role in World War II, especially in getting that started. But since World War II, who's been the main belligerent in the world? The U.S. government. It starts 6 to 8 new wars per president. Just in recent years, we've had the Ukraine war. Now we're starting the Iran war. And we used to back We used to back Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war in the 70s and 80s. Look at weapons of mass destruction, that lie. Look at liberating Libya under Gaddafi. Look at liberating Syria. All lies, all BS, going back decades and decades and decades. See the link below. I hope I'll remember to put my book, The Case for Legalizing Capitalism. There's a whole chapter on wars, and reference that chapter as proof of what I'm saying about the US starting wars. It's pretty clear the US is the main belligerent in the world, the main one starting wars, or the most of them. Beyond that, COVID. Several years ago, we had a massive pandemic. Well, it wasn't really a pandemic. It wasn't even by traditional definitions a pandemic. The death rate was overstated by 1,000%. Not nearly as many people died as they said as they would. And most of those were the people who were already sick and elderly. The median death rate was 84 years old. Not to mention the government created the virus itself by funding research through, well, it started in the University of North Carolina, but anyway, it doesn't matter. We funded the Wuhan lab. So, but regardless, even if it was natural, we had a pandemic, the government was the one who did all the damage by shutting down the economy. You didn't need to shut down the economy. The health establishment all around the world at the time said, don't do lockdowns. I'll try to remember to put proof of that in the links also, in the comments. But the main damage from COVID was done by the lockdowns, by trying to help and keep people safe, sending people to nursing homes. Most of the deaths, like 90% of the deaths, were in nursing homes, hospitals, and jails. Most of the people who died of COVID in the hospital contracted COVID in the hospital, or at least I think 50% at least. So nothing to do with COVID was anything you think. For proof, go to my site, factcourt.com, and do a search in the library for COVID and things related to COVID. And I offer absolute proof that 95% of what you were told about COVID was total BS, or it was exaggerated by 190%. So COVID was a government creation. Had there not been government action to help during COVID, you wouldn't have even noticed there was a pandemic, just as happened in 1969, 1957 or 58, if I recall, 1936. So that's just a fact. Government created the problem. And that's a theme here. All of these problems are created by government trying to help. Communist countries that killed over 100 million people last century were run by government officials claiming to help people. It's always in the name of helping. It never helps. We haven't solved poverty. Everything the government touches, it gets worse. Every single thing. So the bottom line is all of our problems were created by government, created by politicians. That's what government is. Politicians claiming to help, claiming they know how to solve problems. They don't. None of them do. And I don't think they have any interest in solving problems. They have an interest in making a living off of you, the taxpayer, off of claiming they can help. Vote for me. I'll give you their money. That'll help. We'll solve that problem. It doesn't. It makes things worse. All of these problems that I listed were caused by these people promising to help and making things worse. No matter who you vote for, Democrat or Republican, none of them are helping you. And by the way, they're all doing the same thing. Regardless of their narratives, look at their voting records. They're all voting for the same thing. They're all harming you. They're making your life worse. Quit voting. Quit supporting politicians. Quit believing what they say. If you're on the right, you hate and disbelieve Biden or Obama. If you're on the left, you hate or disbelieve Bush or Trump. Quit playing that stupid game. They're all evil. They're all bad. They've all caused all of these problems. All of them. So that's the lesson. I hope you will consider this and take it to heart. Take care.